You know what they don't tell you about being humanity's premier diplomat? The job description conveniently leaves out the part where you spend most of your time wanting to punch people in the face, but you have to smile and use your words instead. Commander Jake Sullivan had been staring at the neutral space station's docking bay for exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds, but mentally preparing himself for what could either be the most important peace negotiation in human history, or the most spectacular diplomatic failure since someone decided to serve bacon at the first Kosher Confederation Summit. The Vorthak Empire had been humanity's biggest headache for the past 5 years. Not the biggest threat, mind you, just the biggest headache. They were like that neighbor who plays music too loud at 3 in the morning, except instead of filing a noise complaint, but you had to worry about them glassing your entire solar system. The war had been brutal, expensive, and frankly, nobody was winning. Both sides were hemorrhaging resources faster than a punctured spacesuit, which is why Jake found himself here, about to sit across from the most terrifying alien diplomat in known space. Ambassador Zara Vorthak had a reputation that preceded her like a freight train carrying explosives. Standing 7 feet tall with crystalline blue skin that could literally cut glass, she was known for her tactical brilliance, her complete lack of patience for small talk, and her habit of reducing opposing negotiators to quivering puddles of inadequacy. Jake had read her file 14 times. She had never lost a negotiation. Never. Not once. The closest anyone had come to a draw was when the Centauri delegate had simply fled the room in tears. What the file hadn't mentioned was the 8-year-old Vorthak child who kept tugging at her ceremonial robes every 5 minutes with questions like, "Mom, why do humans have such tiny eyes? And do you think they know their skin looks like uncooked dough?" "Pip," Ambassador Zara said in a voice that could freeze helium, "we discussed this. You observe. You do not comment on the physical appearance of other species." The kid, Pip apparently, looked appropriately chastened for about half a second before brightening up again. "But Mom, I was just wondering if humans molt like we do, because his skin looks really old and—" Pip. "Right. Observing. Got it." Jake cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should begin with the preliminary territorial discussions? I understand there are some concerns about the Kepler system mining rights." But Zara's crystalline features shifted into what Jake hoped was concentration and not the prelude to violence. "The Kepler system was claimed by Vorthak scouts 3 cycles before your species even achieved faster than light travel. Your mining operations are illegal occupations of sovereign Vorthak territory." "Well, that's certainly one way to look at it," Jake said, pulling up the holographic display. "Of course, our archaeological surveys indicate human settlements in that region dating back at least 50 years before your scouts arrived. So really, it's more of a whose grandfather was here first situation." Pip's hand shot up like he was in school. Ooh. I know this one. Mom says possession is 9/10 of galactic law, and whoever has the biggest guns gets to keep the stuff." Both adults turned to stare at the kid who was beaming proudly. "That," Jake said slowly, "is not exactly how interstellar law works, kid." "Pip," Zara said with the kind of patience that suggested she'd had this conversation before, "diplomatic solutions are more complex than simple military superiority." "But you always say—" "What I say in private strategy meetings and what applies to peace negotiations are different things." Jake watched this exchange with the growing realization that he might be the only adult in the room who actually wanted to avoid restarting an interstellar war. The kid was clearly a military strategist in training, and the mom was trying to balance being a terrifying warrior diplomat with, well, being a mom. This was going to be a long day. "Right," he said, pulling up the next hologram. "So territorial disputes aside, let's talk about the real issue here. The trade embargo on quantum processors. Your people need them for your terraforming projects, and we need your crystalline matrices for our defense systems. Seems like a natural trade partnership." Zara leaned forward, her crystalline skin catching the light in a way that was either beautiful or terrifying, depending on your perspective. And what assurance do we have that these quantum processors won't be used to develop weapons systems designed to target Vorthak vessels? The same assurance we have that your crystalline matrices won't be used to develop better ways to blow up human colonies, Jake replied. None whatsoever. But that's where trust comes in. Trust, Zara repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. Mom doesn't trust anybody, Pip announced helpfully. She says trust is what gets you killed in space. Pip. What? It's true. You said it yesterday when Captain Vex wanted to. That will be enough cultural commentary from the peanut gallery, Jake interrupted, though he was fighting back a smile. How about we take a short break? I could use some coffee, and I'm sure you could use a moment to discuss strategy with your advisor here. As they adjourned, Jake couldn't help but notice that Ambassador Zara Vorthak, terror of the diplomatic corps, looked exactly like what she was. A single mom trying to do an impossible job while keeping her kid from accidentally starting an interstellar incident. This was definitely going to be a long day. The corridor outside the conference room was supposed to be neutral territory, designed with that bland, inoffensive aesthetic that screamed, "Please don't start any wars here." Jake was leaning against the wall, trying to process the fact that he'd just spent 3 hours arguing with a 7-foot-tall crystalline warrior about mining rights, while her 8-year-old son provided running the commentary when said 8-year-old appeared beside him like a tiny blue ninja. "Commander Sullivan," Pip said with the kind of serious tone usually reserved for declaring war or ordering pizza. Hi there, Pip. Shouldn't you be with your mom?" "She's talking to General Vex about supply chains. Super boring stuff. Listen, I have a proposition for you." Jake blinked. "A proposition?" "Kid, you're 8. 8 3/4, actually. And age is just a number when it comes to recognizing opportunity." Pip crossed his arms, which would have been more intimidating if he wasn't barely tall enough to reach Jake's elbow. "I think you should marry my mom." The words hit Jake like a malfunctioning hyperdrive. He actually looked around to make sure no one else had heard this conversation, because explaining to his superiors why an alien child was trying to arrange his marriage would definitely not look good in his mission report. Hold on there, kiddo. That's not how diplomacy works. Or marriage. Or really anything. Why not? Pip asked with the kind of innocent curiosity that could topple governments. "You like her, right? I can tell because you only flinched twice when she did the intimidation stare, and most people flinch at least 6 times during their first meeting." "The intimidation stare? You know, the one where she looks like she's calculating how many different ways she could kill you with a soup spoon. She practiced it in the mirror this morning." Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "Look, Pip, I'm sure your mom is a very nice person under all the terrifying warrior stuff, but we're in the middle of peace negotiations. Romance is not on the agenda." "But it should be," Pip insisted, his crystalline skin starting to glow slightly with excitement. "The mom works all the time. She never has fun. She never smiles except when she's watching those old human movies where things explode. And she definitely never dates anybody because she says most people are either too scared of her or too stupid to be worth her time." "Well, that's actually pretty accurate assessment of the dating scene." "Exactly. But you're not scared of her, and you're not stupid. You're perfect." Before Jake could explain all the ways this logic was flawed, Captain Rex Martinez came strolling down the corridor with that insufferably cheerful expression he always wore when he was about to make Jake's life more complicated. Well, what do we have here? Commander Sullivan making friends with the local wildlife. "Rex, this is Pip." "Pip, this is Captain Martinez, head of station security and professional pain in my ass." "Language, Jake. There's a child present." Rex grinned and crouched down to Pip's level. "So, little guy, what's the discussion about?" I'm trying to convince Commander Sullivan to marry my mom, Pip said matter-of-factly. Rex's grin widened to dangerous proportions. Oh, this is rich. Please continue. Rex, don't encourage him. Mom needs someone who appreciates her tactical brilliance and her collection of ancient human action movies. Commander Sullivan clearly has good taste in entertainment. I saw him watching that old movie about the guy who fights robots with his bare hands while the space station was under attack. May. How did you never mind? Look, kid, your mom is a very impressive person, but we're from different species, different cultures. Different planets, Pip finished. So? My great-aunt Zix married a Centauri diplomat, and they've been happy for 30 years. Love transcends species barriers, Commander Sullivan. I read that in one of Mom's romance novels. Rex was now openly laughing. Your mom reads romance novels? Oh, Jake, this just keeps getting better. She hides them behind her military strategy manuals, Pip continued, oblivious to Jake's growing mortification. She really likes the ones where the tough warrior woman meets the brave space captain who isn't intimidated by her competence. Pip, Jake said weakly, maybe we shouldn't discuss your mom's reading habits. Why not? It's relevant data. You're a space captain, she's a warrior woman, and you're definitely not intimidated by competence because you keep arguing with her about trade regulations, even when she does the scary face. Rex stood up, wiping tears from his eyes. Kid, I like you already. Tell you what, why don't we help you with this little matchmaking project? Rex, no. Rex, yes, this is the most entertainment I've had since the Proxima Centauri ambassador got drunk and tried to challenge the vending machine to single combat. Pip's eyes lit up like a supernova. Really? You'll help? Absolutely. First rule of matchmaking, create opportunities for the targets to spend time together. Jake, didn't you mention something about the environmental controls in the conference room being a little glitchy? Jake stared at his best friend with the kind of horror usually reserved for discovering your coffee maker was actually a disguised alien spy. Rex, what are you planning? Nothing dramatic. Just a little accidental lockdown. Maybe an hour or so of forced proximity. You know, for diplomatic purposes. That's brilliant, Pip exclaimed. And I can program the lighting to be more romantic. Mom always says proper ambience is crucial for successful negotiations. She does not say that. She does. She said it right before she demolished the Zephyrian trade delegation last month. Proper ambience, Pip. If you're going to crush someone's dreams, at least do it in style. Jake realized he was fighting a losing battle. Between Rex's mischievous streak and Pip's 8-year-old determination, he was going to end up locked in a room with the most dangerous diplomat in known space. And somehow this was being framed as a romantic opportunity. This is a terrible idea, he said. The best ideas always are, Rex replied, already heading toward the maintenance panel. Jake watched his best friend and his new 8-year-old wingman start planning what could either be the most successful diplomatic breakthrough in human history, or the most embarrassing way to accidentally restart an interstellar war. I'm going to regret this, aren't I? Definitely, Rex said cheerfully. But think of the stories you'll have to tell. The environmental controls on Neutral Station Alpha 7 were apparently designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor and a degree in creative engineering. Jake had discovered this when the conference room doors sealed shut with a cheerful chirp. The lights dimmed to what could generously be called romantic mood lighting, and the ventilation system began playing what sounded suspiciously like elevator music. Well, Jake said, pressing the door controls for the third time and getting nothing but a sarcastic beep in response. This is either a very convenient malfunction or your son has inherited your tactical genius. Ambassador Zara stood in the center of the room, her crystalline skin reflecting the dimmed lights in a way that was definitely not helping Jake's concentration. Pip has been spending too much time with Captain Martinez. I suspect we are the victims of what humans call a setup. Yeah, Rex has all the subtlety of a supernova. The kid's probably learning all his worst habits. Jake settled into one of the chairs, figuring if they were going to be stuck here, he might as well be comfortable. So, how long do you think before someone notices we're missing? Approximately 43 minutes, assuming standard security protocols. Zara remained standing, her posture rigid with military precision. Unless, of course, this is part of a larger plan to compromise the negotiations. Right, because clearly the best way to handle peace talks is to lock the negotiators in a room with mood lighting and smooth jazz. For the first time since he'd met her, Jake saw something that might have been amusement flicker across Zara's crystalline features. Smooth jazz? That's what this is, right? Unless Vorthak elevator music is just naturally sultry. I am not familiar with the term elevator music. Oh, you're missing out. It's this uniquely human art form where you take perfectly good songs and make them so bland and inoffensive that they actually become offensive to anyone with functioning ears. Zara's rigid posture relaxed slightly. Humans have a fascinating relationship with audio torture. We're pioneers in the field. We've also perfected the art of making small talk about weather on planets that don't have weather, discussing sports teams that don't exist, and pretending to enjoy social gatherings that everyone hates. And yet you are considered one of your species' most effective diplomats. Jake laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise both of them. Effective? I'm the guy they send when they want someone to tell the truth instead of dancing around it for 6 months. I'm basically the diplomatic equivalent of a blunt instrument. Interesting. I was told you were known for your tactical brilliance and unconventional approaches to conflict resolution. That's a fancy way of saying I'm too stubborn to give up and too sarcastic to be properly intimidating. Jake studied her face, trying to read the alien expressions. What about you? Are you really the terrifying warrior diplomat everyone says you are? Or are you just really good at the intimidation stare? Zara was quiet for a long moment, then moved to sit in the chair across from him. The motion was fluid, graceful, and somehow made her seem less like a 7-foot-tall weapon and more like a person who happened to be 7 feet tall. The intimidation stare is a learned skill, she said finally. Necessary when you are the only female in the Vorthak High Command and the only parent in the diplomatic corps. That can't be easy. Easy is not the word I would use. Zara's voice carried a weight that spoke of years of fighting for every scrap of respect and recognition. When Pip was born, the High Command suggested I take a support role, handle communications, logistics, paperwork. Leave the important decisions to those who could focus without distraction. Let me guess you told them exactly where they could file their suggestions. I told them I would demonstrate my ability to multitask by simultaneously negotiating the Kepler system mining rights and teaching them several new ways to experience pain. Jake grinned. And they backed down? They backed down. But the expectation remains that I must be twice as competent as my male colleagues to be considered half as capable. Every negotiation is a test. Every decision is scrutinized. Every sign of emotion or weakness is noted and filed away for future use. Sounds exhausting. It is. Zara leaned back in her chair, and for a moment Jake could see the exhaustion she was talking about. Pip deserves better than a mother who is always in crisis mode, always preparing for the next battle, always choosing duty over family time. He seems pretty proud of you. He is 8 years old. He does not yet understand that his mother is considered a necessary evil by her own people, tolerated because she wins but never truly accepted because she cares more about her child than about conquest. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way that seemed to surprise them both. Jake found himself leaning forward, drawn by the glimpse of vulnerability from someone who had spent the last 3 days projecting nothing but strength and control. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think Pip's got pretty good judgment for an 8-year-old. He sees a mom who's fighting to build a better world for him, even when that world doesn't appreciate what she's doing. That's not a necessary evil. That's a hero. Zara's crystalline skin shimmered slightly, a reaction Jake was beginning to recognize as emotional. Humans have an interesting perspective on heroism. We're big fans of the underdog story, probably because we spend most of our time being the underdog. Is that why you became a diplomat instead of a warrior? To be the underdog? Jake laughed. I became a diplomat because someone had to, and apparently I was the only one stupid enough to volunteer. Turns out I'm pretty good at talking to people who want to kill me, which is either a useful skill or a sign of serious psychological issues. Perhaps both. Definitely both. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the definitely not elevator music and the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Jake found himself studying Zara's profile, the way the light played across her crystalline features, the careful way she held herself even in relaxation. She was beautiful, he realized, but not in any way he could easily define or categorize. Jake, she said finally, and he realized it was the first time she'd used his first name. Why did you agree to these negotiations? Your file suggests you prefer active assignments to diplomatic ones. Honestly, because I was tired of shooting at your people. War's expensive, messy, and nobody wins. Peace is cheaper, cleaner, and everybody gets to go home to their families. He paused. Plus, someone told me you were impossible to negotiate with, and I've always been a sucker for a challenge. And your assessment so far? You're tough, you're smart, you care about your people, and you're trying to do the right thing in a situation where there might not be a right answer. That's not impossible to negotiate with. That's someone worth negotiating with. Zara turned to look at him directly, her alien features unreadable. Your son was right about one thing, she said. What's that? You are not easily intimidated. Give me time. I'm sure you'll find my weakness eventually. I suspect, Zara said with something that might have been a smile, that your weakness is not what most people would expect. Before Jake could ask what she meant, the lights came back to full brightness and the doors opened with a cheerful chime. Pip stood in the doorway, beaming with pride, while Rex lurked behind him with a satisfied grin. How was your diplomatic breakthrough? Rex asked innocently. Jake looked at Zara, who was already back to her composed diplomatic persona, then at the two co-conspirators in the doorway. Educational, he said finally. Very educational. Jake should have known that when things start going well in space diplomacy, the universe has a twisted sense of humor about keeping them that way. He was reviewing the morning's actual progress, with tentative agreements on 3 separate trade issues and only one minor threat of interstellar war when the docking bay alarm started screaming. Incoming vessel, Vorthak military designation, came the announcement over the station's comm system. General Krax requesting immediate boarding permission. Across the conference table, Zara went completely still in that way that predators do right before they strike. Pip, who had been quietly drawing what looked like a tactical diagram of the perfect wedding cake, looked up with the kind of expression that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to wear. Mom? He said quietly. It's all right, Pip. General Krax is just here to check on our progress. Zara's voice was steady, but Jake could see the tension in her crystalline features. Perhaps you should go find Captain Martinez. I believe he promised to show you the station's defense systems. But Mom... Now, Pip. The kid looked between his mother and Jake with the kind of understanding that suggested he knew more about Vorthak politics than most adults. If General Krax tries to hurt you, I'm going to program the food replicators to only produce Brussels sprouts for a month. Noted, Jake said solemnly. Now go find Rex before he gets into trouble without supervision. After Pip left, Jake leaned back in his chair and studied Zara's face. So, General Krax, old friend of yours? General Krax is the leader of the war faction in the High Command. He believes that peace with humans is a sign of weakness and that I am too. She paused, searching for the right word. Too what? Too compromised by personal attachments to properly represent Vorthak interests. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Personal attachments meaning Pip. Personal attachments meaning any concern for civilian casualties, sustainable resource management, or long-term strategic thinking that extends beyond the next military campaign. Zara's voice was carefully neutral, but Jake could hear the anger underneath. General Krax believes that strength comes from conquest, not cooperation. And if he decides you're too compromised, then I will be replaced by someone who shares his vision of Vorthak's superiority. The conference room doors opened, and Jake got his first look at General Krax. If Zara was intimidating, Krax was terrifying. He stood nearly 8 feet tall with crystalline skin that was more black than blue, and he moved with the kind of predatory grace that suggested he'd be just as comfortable tearing opponents apart with his bare hands as with advanced weaponry. Ambassador Vorthak, Krax said, his voice like grinding stone. I trust your negotiations are proceeding according to high command expectations. General Krax, Zara replied, standing to her full height. I was not informed of your inspection visit. The High Command does not require your permission to monitor critical diplomatic missions. Krax's eyes shifted to Jake, and Jake felt like he was being evaluated as a potential snack. Commander Sullivan, your reputation precedes you. All good things, I hope. Your reputation for being difficult to eliminate, primarily. Jake blinked. Well, that's not ominous at all. General Krax, Zara interjected, Commander Sullivan and I have made significant progress on the trade agreements. The quantum processor exchange alone will benefit both our civilizations for decades. Yes, the quantum processors. Krax moved to the holographic display, his massive form casting shadows across the projected star charts. Tell me, Ambassador, how do we ensure these quantum processors are not used to develop weapon systems designed to target Vorthak vessels? The same way we ensure your crystalline matrices aren't used to develop better ways to penetrate human defenses, Jake said. Trust and mutual verification protocols. Krax's laugh sounded like grinding metal. Trust. An interesting concept from a species that has broken 17 separate ceasefire agreements in the past 5 years. That's rich coming from someone whose people invented the concept of preemptive self-defense. Gentlemen, Zara said, stepping between them, perhaps we could focus on the substantive issues rather than historical grievances. Substantive issues, Krax repeated, his attention shifting back to Zara. Yes, let us discuss substance. The High Command has received concerning reports about your conduct during these negotiations. Jake felt the temperature in the room drop about 10 degrees. What kind of reports? Reports suggesting that Ambassador Vorthak has allowed personal considerations to compromise her judgment, that she has developed inappropriate attachments that cloud her ability to represent Vorthak interests. And what kind of attachments would those be? Jake asked, though he was pretty sure he already knew where this was going. The kind that lead to extended private meetings with enemy negotiators. The kind that result in concessions that benefit human interests at the expense of Vorthak's superiority. Zara's crystalline skin was starting to glow with what Jake was learning to recognize as barely contained rage. Every concession I have made has been matched by equivalent human concessions. These negotiations are proceeding according to established diplomatic protocols. Are they? Krax pulled up a different holographic display, one that showed what looked like surveillance footage of the station corridors. Because our intelligence reports suggest that your son has been conspiring with human personnel to arrange private meetings between you and Commander Sullivan. Jake's blood ran cold as he saw footage of Pip talking to Rex, of the 3 of them planning their ridiculous lockdown scheme, goal of himself and Zara talking in the dimmed conference room. It looked exactly like what it was, a setup. And in the context of interstellar politics, it looked like espionage. General Krax, Jake said carefully, I can assure you that any private conversations between Ambassador Vorthak and myself were purely professional." "Professional," Krax mused. "How interesting. And I suppose your son's matchmaking attempts are also purely professional, Ambassador?" Zara went completely still. "My son is 8 years old. He does not understand the complexities of diplomatic protocol." "Perhaps not. But you do. And yet you allowed these inappropriate interactions to continue." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jake could see the trap closing around them, could see how everything that had seemed innocent and hopeful suddenly looked like evidence of collusion and betrayal. "Now," Krax continued, "I think it is time for new leadership in these negotiations. A leadership that puts Vorthak interests first." That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red, and the station's alarm system started blaring. Through the conference room's windows, Jake could see explosions lighting up the space around the station. What the hell, Jake started. "Sabotage," Zara said grimly. "Someone doesn't want these negotiations to succeed." Krax's expression was unreadable in the red light. How convenient. An attack just as questions arise about the security of these talks. Jake was already moving toward the communications panel. "Rex, report. What's our situation?" "Jake, we've got multiple breaches in the station's outer hull. Someone's been planting charges in the maintenance areas. And Jake, they've got Pip." The words hit like a physical blow. Jake spun to look at Zara, whose crystalline features had gone completely rigid with a combination of fury and terror that he'd never seen before. "Who has him?" she asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Unknown hostiles. But Jake, they're demanding that both negotiators surrender themselves in exchange for the kid's safety." Jake looked at Zara, seeing his own determination reflected in her alien features. Whatever political games Krax was playing, whatever accusations he was making, none of it mattered now. Someone had taken Pip, and that was unacceptable. "General Krax," Jake said, "I don't suppose you'd be interested in postponing this power struggle until after we save the kid?" For a moment Krax's expression was unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Commander Sullivan, I believe we may have found the first thing our species can agree on. No one threatens Vorthak children and lives to discuss it." Jake grinned back, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with switching from diplomacy to direct action. Finally, something we can all work together on. "Agreed," Zara said, and Jake could see the warrior emerging from behind the diplomat's careful facade. "Let's go get my son." Section 5, Crisis and Revelation. Jake had been in a lot of dangerous situations during his career. But this was the first time he'd found himself crawling through maintenance ducts with a 7-foot-tall crystalline alien warrior and a 8-foot-tall crystalline alien general who might or might not be planning to kill him after they rescued the kid. The things they don't prepare you for in diplomatic training. Left corridor. Rex's voice crackled through the comm system. "Thermal imaging shows 3 hostiles in the main cargo bay, plus our little friend." "How's Pip doing?" Jake whispered. "Kid's fine. Actually, he's been giving them tactical advice. I think he's confused about whether he's been rescued or kidnapped." Jake could hear Zara's quiet laughter despite the tension. "That sounds like Pip." "Who are these people anyway?" Jake asked, checking his sidearm for the 3rd time. "Mercenaries," General Krax rumbled from behind them, "hired by someone who wants these negotiations to fail. The question is whether they're working for human or Vorthak interests." "Does it matter?" Zara asked. "They took my child." "It matters for the paperwork," Jake said. "I need to know which forms to fill out when we're done." They reached the cargo bay access panel, and Jake could hear voices through the bulkhead. One of them was definitely Pip, and he sounded more indignant than scared. "Completely inefficient," Pip was saying. If you're going to hold someone hostage, you need better communication protocols. How are the negotiators supposed to meet your demands if they don't know what your demands are? Kid's got a point, one of the mercenaries replied. Maybe we should have thought this through better. We thought it through fine, another voice snapped. The plan is simple. Negotiators surrender, we eliminate them both. Negotiations fail, war continues. Everyone who's paying us stays happy. Jake exchanged glances with Zara and Krax. So much for the mystery of who was behind this. Both sides, Jake whispered. War profiteers, Krax confirmed grimly. There are always those who benefit from conflict. But that's stupid, Pip continued from inside the cargo bay. If you eliminate the negotiators, both governments will just send new ones. You're not solving the underlying problem, you're just delaying the inevitable solution. The kid's right, the first mercenary said. This is a temporary fix at best. Will you stop listening to the kid? The second mercenary shouted. He's 8 years old. 8 3/4, Pip corrected. And I've been studying military strategy since I was 6. Your plan has more holes than the Centauri defense grid. Jake had to admire the kid's nerve. Most adults would be terrified in a hostage situation, but Pip was apparently conducting a tactical critique of his kidnapper's methodology. All right, Jake whispered. What's the plan? I go through the main entrance, Krax said. Large, obvious, intimidating. They focus on me. I take the upper access, Zara added. Pip will recognize my approach and know to stay low. And I go through the maintenance shaft and come up behind them, Jake finished. It's classic pincer movement. Agreed. On my mark. Krax checked his weapon, a massive crystalline construct that looked like it could punch holes through starship hulls. 3, 2, 1. The cargo bay doors exploded inward as Krax made his entrance. Jake had to admit, the guy knew how to make an impression. 8 feet of angry Vorthak general announcing his presence was the kind of thing that tended to get people's attention. Release the child, Krax boomed, and your deaths will be swift. Jake used the distraction to slip through the maintenance shaft, coming up behind the mercenaries as they scrambled to respond to the giant alien warrior who had just kicked down their door. Through the chaos, he could see Pip huddled behind a cargo container, looking excited rather than terrified. Hands up, Jake called out, his weapon trained on the nearest mercenary. Nobody needs to die today. That's when Zara dropped from the ceiling like a crystalline nightmare, landing directly on top of the second mercenary and eliminating him from the fight with the kind of efficiency that reminded Jake why the Vorthak were considered the galaxy's premier warriors. The remaining mercenary, caught between 3 armed opponents and one very disappointed 8-year-old, made the smart choice and surrendered. Pip, Zara called out. Are you injured? I'm fine, Mom, Pip replied, scrambling out from behind the cargo container. But we need to talk about your entry technique. The ceiling approach was excellent, but you could have used the support beams for better leverage. I'll take that under advisement, Zara said, pulling her son into what looked like a bone-crushing hug. Jake couldn't help but smile at the sight. For all her warrior training and diplomatic composure, Zara was still a mom who had just gotten her kid back safe. Commander Sullivan, Pip said, wriggling free from his mother's embrace, did you see how Mom took out that guy? That was amazing. She's like a ninja, but with more crystalline skin and better tactical awareness. I saw, Jake said, grinning. Your mom's pretty impressive. She's the best, Pip said proudly. And you did pretty good too, for a human. I especially liked the part where you didn't shoot anybody until you had to. High praise from the tactical expert, Jake replied. General Krax approached the captured mercenary, his crystalline features set in an expression that suggested the interrogation was going to be brief and unpleasant. Who hired you? The mercenary, a scarred human who looked like he'd seen too many battles, glanced between the three aliens and Jake. "Does it matter? You got the kid back. Can't we call it even?" "It matters," Zara said, stepping forward, "because someone just declared war on my family. And I take that very personally." There was something in her voice that made Jake's skin crawl, and he wasn't even the target. The mercenary apparently felt it too, because he started talking immediately. "Consortium of war manufacturers," he said quickly. "They've got contracts with military suppliers on both sides. The longer the war goes on, the richer they get. Peace negotiations were bad for business." "Names?" Krax demanded. "I don't have names. We dealt through intermediaries. But they've got operations throughout the sector. This was just supposed to be a simple elimination job." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Simple elimination job. "They wanted us both dead." "Yeah, well, nothing personal. Just business." "Business?" Zara repeated, her voice carrying the kind of fury that could freeze atmospheres. "They turned my son into a pawn in their business." Jake watched her face and realized something that probably should have been obvious earlier. Zara wasn't just angry about the kidnapping. She was angry about the whole situation, about being forced to choose between her duty as a diplomat and her role as a mother, about having to constantly prove herself in a system that saw her as expendable. "Zara," he said quietly, "it's over. Pip's safe." "Is he?" she asked, turning to look at Jake with eyes that held years of exhaustion and frustration. "Is he safe when there are people who see him as a convenient target? Is he safe when his mother's career makes him a liability?" The question hung in the air, and Jake realized they weren't just talking about the mercenaries anymore. They were talking about General Krax, about the high command, about all the political pressures that made Zara's position precarious. "Mom," Pip said quietly, "I'm not scared." "You should be," Zara replied. "You should be scared of a universe where 8-year-olds get kidnapped to influence peace negotiations." "But I'm not." Pip insisted, "because I know you'll always come for me. And now I know Commander Sullivan will too. And General Krax, even though he's really scary and probably wants to arrest you for treason." General Krax made a sound that might have been laughter. The child has remarkable insight for someone who is 8 3/4. "So what happens now?" Jake asked. "The mercenaries are dealt with, the immediate threat is over, but the larger problem remains. Someone's going to keep trying to sabotage these negotiations." "The larger problem," Krax said thoughtfully, "is that we have enemies on both sides who profit from our conflict. Perhaps it is time to consider a more direct approach to ending their business model." Jake looked at the Vorthak general with new respect. "You're talking about joint operations against the war profiteers. I am talking about protecting our peoples from those who would manipulate us into eternal conflict for their own benefit. That would require unprecedented cooperation between our militaries," Zara pointed out. "It would also require unprecedented trust," Jake added. Pip looked between the three adults with the kind of expression that suggested he was watching pieces fall into place on a puzzle they were all still trying to solve. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if you're going to work together to stop the bad guys, you might as well work together on everything else too. I mean, if you can trust each other with military operations, you can probably trust each other with trade agreements." Out of the mouths of babes, Jake thought. The kid had just summarized what it had taken them 3 days of negotiations to figure out. "The child makes a valid point," Krax admitted. "Perhaps it is time for the Vorthak Empire to consider a more comprehensive relationship with humanity." "Comprehensive relationship," Zara repeated. "Is that what we're calling it?" Jake caught the slight emphasis she put on the word relationship and realized they weren't just talking about politics anymore. They were talking about the fact that somewhere between the diplomatic sparring and the life-threatening situations, they'd started to care about each other as more than just negotiating partners. "Among other things," he said quietly, meeting her eyes, General Krax looked between them with the kind of expression that suggested he was seeing the whole picture for the first time. I believe I owe you both an apology. For what? Zara asked. For allowing politics to blind me to what was actually happening here. You were not compromised by personal attachments, Ambassador Vortak. You were strengthened by them. Jake felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't realized was tight. So what's the official position of the Vortak High Command going to be? The official position, Krax said formally, is that Ambassador Vortak has exceeded all expectations in these negotiations, and that her methods should be studied and replicated in future diplomatic missions. And the unofficial position? Jake asked. Krax's crystalline features shifted into what Jake was learning to recognize as a Vortak smile. The unofficial position is that perhaps it is time for the Vortak Empire to embrace the human concept of love conquers all. Pip beamed like a small son. Does this mean you're going to marry Mom now, Commander Sullivan? Jake looked at Zara, who was trying very hard not to laugh, then at General Krax, who was definitely amused, then at Rex, who had just arrived and was grinning like an idiot. Kid, he said finally, I think we should probably finish the peace negotiations first. But then you'll marry her. Jake met Zara's eyes, seeing humor and warmth and something that looked like hope in her alien features. Then he said, we'll see what happens. 1 year later, Jake stood at the altar of the most ridiculous wedding venue in known space, a crystal garden on the neutral moon of Serenity Prime, with guests representing 17 different species and enough diplomatic security to stop a small war. Which, considering his track record, was probably a good idea. You know, he said into the microphone, looking out at the assembled crowd of humans, Vortaks, and assorted alien dignitaries, when I signed up to negotiate a peace treaty, nobody mentioned that the job benefits would include gaining a family. The crowd laughed, including his new mother-in-law, a formidable Vortak matriarch who had spent the past week giving him pointed advice about proper child-rearing techniques and the importance of maintaining his wife's crystalline skin through proper nutrition. Jake was pretty sure she liked him, mainly because she hadn't tried to kill him even once during the pre-wedding festivities. A year ago, I thought diplomacy was about finding common ground between enemies. Turns out, sometimes it's about finding common ground between people who were never really enemies to begin with, just two sides who forgot how to talk to each other. He looked down at Pip, who was serving as ring-bearer, and looked absolutely thrilled to be the center of attention. The kid had grown 3 inches in the past year and somehow become even more precocious, if that was possible. He was also wearing a miniature tuxedo that matched Jake's, complete with a bow tie that he'd insisted on tying himself. Pip, Jake continued, I want to thank you for being the galaxy's most effective wingman. Without your 8-year-old wisdom and complete disregard for proper diplomatic protocol, your mom and I would probably still be arguing about trade regulations. 8 3/4. Pip called out, getting another laugh from the crowd. Right, 8 3/4. My mistake. Jake grinned at the kid, then turned his attention to his bride. Zara stood beside him in a gown that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical. Knowing her, it was probably armored and contained at least 3 hidden weapons. Her crystalline skin caught the light from Serenity Prime's twin suns, creating patterns of blue and silver that took his breath away every time he looked at her. Zara. Oh, he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, you taught me that strength isn't about being the toughest person in the room. It's about being brave enough to be vulnerable, smart enough to ask for help, and stubborn enough to keep fighting for what matters. You're the strongest person I know. And somehow you decided I was worth fighting for too. She smiled, that rare genuine expression that she saved for family moments, and Jake felt that familiar flutter in his chest that still surprised him after a year of marriage negotiations that had somehow turned into actual relationship negotiations. Also, he added, you're really good at the intimidation stare, which comes in handy when dealing with difficult trade delegates. And pirates, Rex called out from his position as best man. Don't forget the pirates. Right, pirates too. Turns out having a wife who can literally cut through starship hulls with her bare hands is a significant career advantage in my line of work. The crowd was eating it up, which was good because Jake had been nervous about giving a speech to an audience that included several species who communicated primarily through color changes and pheromone releases. Fortunately, laughter seemed to be universal. "But seriously," he said, his tone shifting to something more heartfelt, "the best thing about this whole ridiculous situation is that I got to discover that the universe is a lot smaller and a lot friendlier than I thought. It turns out that whether you're human or Vorthak or any other species, we all want the same basic things: safety for our families, respect for our work, and someone who thinks we're worth coming home to." He looked out at the crowd, seeing faces from both sides of what had been a bitter conflict just a year ago. General Krax was sitting in the front row, looking dignified in his ceremonial armor, and apparently enjoying his role as Zara's military escort. Captain Martinez was grinning like an idiot and already working on his third glass of whatever the Centaurian delegation had contributed to the reception. Even Ambassador Chen from the Terran Federation was there, which was remarkable considering she'd spent the past 5 years trying to have Jake transferred to somewhere quiet and harmless. "The peace treaty we signed 6 months ago has held stronger than anyone expected," Jake continued. "Trade is flourishing, joint scientific missions are producing breakthrough discoveries, and our combined military task forces have eliminated 3 separate war profiteer operations in the past quarter. Apparently, when you stop fighting each other and start working together, you can accomplish amazing things. Like planning the most complicated wedding in galactic history," Zara said, speaking for the first time during the ceremony. Her voice carried clearly over the crowd, and Jake could hear the warmth and humor that had become so familiar to him. "That was mostly Pip," Jake replied. "Kid's got a real talent for event planning. I'm thinking about putting him in charge of our next diplomatic summit." "I've already got ideas," Pip announced. "We could have it on that resort planet with the rainbow waterfalls, and instead of boring conference rooms, we could use the adventure caves where you have to work together to solve puzzles. See what I mean?" Jake said to the crowd, 8 3/4 years old, and he's already revolutionizing international relations. The ceremony continued with the traditional exchange of vows, which had required some creative adaptation to accommodate both human and Vorthak customs. Jake promised to honor Zara's strength and support her ambitions, while she promised to protect his stubborn optimism and tolerate his terrible jokes. They exchanged rings, his a simple band of Terran gold, hers a complex crystalline structure that matched her skin and probably doubled as a communications device. During the reception, Jake found himself standing with Rex on the observation deck, watching the sunset paint Serenity prime sky in shades of purple and gold while their guests mingled on the terrace below. "So," Rex said, nursing a drink that was definitely stronger than regulation allowed, "how does it feel to be married to the most dangerous diplomat in known space?" "Honestly, pretty great. She's brilliant, she's beautiful, she can negotiate trade agreements that would make professional mediators weep with envy, and she thinks my jokes are funny." "Your jokes are terrible." "She laughs anyway. That's love, right there." Rex chuckled. "And the kid?" Jake looked down at the reception, where Pip was apparently teaching a group of young Centaurian diplomats some kind of complicated game that involved a lot of running around and strategic thinking. "Pip's amazing. He's smart, he's funny, he's got more tactical sense than most military officers I know, and he's got this incredible gift for seeing the best in people. Plus, he's already started planning our next mission." "Next mission?" "Family vacation. He wants to visit the Crystalline Nebula because it's super romantic and also because there are rumors of pirate activity in that sector." "The kid knows you well." "Yeah, he does." Jake smiled, watching as Pip successfully convinced the Centaurian kids to form what looked like a perfect defensive formation around the dessert table. "You know what the funny thing is? I spent years thinking I was terrible at diplomacy because I always wanted to skip the talking and get straight to the action. Turns out I wasn't terrible at diplomacy, I was just doing the wrong kind of diplomacy." What do you mean? Traditional diplomacy is all about maintaining distance, staying objective, keeping personal feelings out of professional decisions. But the best negotiations happen when you actually care about the people you're working with. When it's personal, you try harder. When it matters to you, you find solutions that work for everyone. Rex raised his glass. To personal diplomacy, then. To family, Jake corrected, clinking his glass against Rex's. Because that's what this really is. We're not just allies or trade partners or whatever the official documents say. We're family now. As if summoned by the word, Pip appeared at Jake's elbow with the kind of conspiratorial expression that usually meant he was planning something elaborate and potentially dangerous. "Dad," he said, and Jake still felt a little thrill every time the kid called him that. "Mom wants to know if you're ready for the surprise." "What surprise?" "The one where we're going on our honeymoon to the Andromeda research station, and also maybe investigating those mysterious energy signatures that the science teams have been reporting." Jake looked at Rex, who was grinning. "She arranged a working honeymoon?" "She knows you, Jake. You'd be bored out of your mind on some peaceful resort planet. This way you get romance and adventure." "And the energy signatures?" "Probably nothing dangerous," Pip said cheerfully. "But if they turn out to be hostile aliens or ancient weapons or something exciting like that, we'll be there to handle it." Jake looked down at his new son, then out at the reception where his new wife was gracefully managing conversations with 3 different species simultaneously, then at his best friend who had somehow become Uncle Rex to an alien kid with a talent for tactical planning. "You know what?" he said finally. "This is going to be the best marriage in galactic history." "Obviously," Pip replied. "I planned it." As the 3 sons of Serenity Prime sat behind the crystal mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors, Jake realized that sometimes the best diplomatic victories really do come from the heart. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, they come with an 8 3/4-year-old tactical advisor who thinks family is the most important alliance of all. The universe, it turned out, was full of surprises, and Jake was looking forward to discovering every single one of them.